At first, people in the village noticed whispering. It came from the well to the barn, from the barn to the church door, and returned to the herbalist behind the garden. People said that some illnesses were now being treated in a strange way. At night, they brought honey with poppy infusion, rubbed whiskey on the temples, read secret words, and ordered silence until dawn. Some people said that it helped, but their voices sounded dry, like those of people who were afraid of being wrong. That year, in the middle of the 14th century, the northern winds were harsh, the bread was heavy and damp, and the rumors were even heavier. The narrator welcomes those who listen to this story, asks them to leave comments about where they like to listen to it, and wishes them a peaceful and pleasant listening experience. There lived in the village a herbalist's apprentice, a grown girl named Lucia. She washed mortars, sorted roots, counted bunches of St. John's wort, and dried flowers on racks. Matteo, the herbalist, a strong old man with careful hands, taught her simple things: that poppy seeds induce sleep, that sage dries, that cinnamon makes the blood flow faster, and that St. John's wort makes the tongue more cautious. He repeated that the most powerful remedies are those that are appropriate to the place and time, not those that loudly praise themselves. Lucia listened and remembered not only the recipes, but also how people are shy about talking about pain. Other people's secrets were her bread and butter because herbalists see what cannot be seen at the market. In the fall, a notebook came into her possession. It happened quite simply. In the evening, a woman came from the fair and left a basket of herbs, saying that she had paid in advance and would pick up the medicine after Vespers. In the basket, under the leaves, was a small bundle, and in the bundle was a thin book with narrow lines. The paper smelled of wax. On the first page, in handwriting resembling that of a monk, was written, "To whom, when, what infusion, how often to repeat." But the names were strange. Instead of familiar words, there were others. Calm before the crown, return of warmth to the blood, purification from shame, strengthening of trust. Next to them were symbols, tiny stars and hooks, like those scribes usually put in the margins of church books. Lucia didn't understand the meaning right away, but she sensed that these were not ordinary recipes. She decided to take the notes to confession, as is customary in questionable matters. A cleric named Araldo served at the local church. He was courteous, spoke softly, and liked to repeat that the world is held together by silence. When Lucia brought the notebook and recounted how she had found it, he replied that any notebook without a seal was dangerous, and told her to leave the book with him for inspection. There was no threat in his words, but the hands that took the notebook squeezed the cover too tightly, and a ring engraved with a poppy seed box flashed on his finger. He said that someone was playing a joke on the world and on faith, that rumors should not be spread, but that unnecessary paper should be burned. He promised to return everything after he had checked it. The next morning, a porter from the city brought a barrel of oil for Matteo to the settlement. On the lid was the mark of the same hand, a tiny star at the edge. Under the hoop was a narrow strip of wax with an imprint similar to a church one, a staff, ears of corn, and the same star between them. Lucia, opening it, remembered the cleric's ring and the feeling that the lines in the notebook were not empty. She had sometimes copied parish records before. Matteo had poor eyesight in candlelight, and the sacristan paid for neat handwriting. Therefore her chest contained copies of marriage records from recent years, names, dates, donations. She took out the scrolls and began to compare them with what she had managed to remember from the notebook. The threads came together to form a pattern. Almost all of the young wives who had been reassured before the wedding made large donations to the church box a few weeks later, some in flour, some in cloth, some in silver. In several cases, the same family name was present, a noble house that owned a mill and a forest. There were also references to night visits, not recorded directly, but hinted at, supporting the peace in silence. Lucia looked at these chains for a long time. A calm, concrete feeling grew inside her. This was not treatment. It was a cover. She told Matteo that she wanted to ask more questions. The old man shrugged and seemed to withdraw. He replied that it was harmful for young people to think too cheerfully about the sacred, that it was a great misfortune to chase old thoughts without having the power to correct them. Then he leaned on the table for a moment and said quietly that she should be careful, because the local walls have ears. Without looking up, he admitted that he had seen similar leaflets at the monastery, that they had brought him prescriptions as if from the bishop's pharmacy and told him to give them only upon special request. He said he didn't ask too many questions because he didn't want to be accused of teaching women bad things. These words were a hint and a request. Don't push walls that are already shaky. But the walls began to shake on their own. In the evening, a carriage stopped at the herbalist's gate, and the coachman left a small package tied with a yellow ribbon, saying that it was for Lucia from a grateful family. Inside the package was a jar of honey, a piece of wax, and a small note in the same strange handwriting. Do not interfere with the peace, or you will not be able to hold your tongue from the fire. The words were short, but it was enough to make ordinary life seem like a silent trap. Thus began a short domestic thriller. An ordinary gift turned into a threat. At night, someone really did come to the window. A shadow lingered by the shutters, shone a tiny lamp, and went away toward the church fence. In the morning, Lucia noticed that a scratch had appeared on the frame in the shape of the same hook as in the margins of her notebook. It was not proof, but it was a sign. On the third day, a Flemish wool merchant arrived in the village. The wheels of his cart got stuck at the ford, and he asked Matteo for some resin for the axle. His name was Jan van der Meer. He knew how to look at signs the same way one looks at fabric, seeing not the pattern, but the principle by which it is woven. Seeing the imprint of a star on the barrel of oil, he said that some workshops put similar marks on secret deliveries when they want to make it impossible to trace the route. He mentioned that there was an office in Milan where such matters were taken, and that he knew a way there through the fair. He did not promise miracles. He only offered to take copies of the records and letters, if Lucia decided to do so, and give them to a man who could read not only letters but also intentions. It hung in the air like a bell rope before an alarm. Lucia was not one to put her trust in a stranger. She called the village bell ringer, a young man with strong hands and impaired hearing. His name was Domenico, and people were used to ignoring him. He lived by the bell tower, carried heavy bundles of keys, and saw more than anyone else who came to the church at night. He was the very person who was underestimated and rarely asked for advice. Lucia asked him to watch the surroundings for the next few nights. She did not choose the boisterous fisherman, the cautious miller, or the village elder. She chose the one who knew how to be a shadow next to another shadow. While Jan was repairing the cart, Lucia secretly copied everything she could: dates, names, amounts, notes in the margins. In order not to keep anything dangerous with her, she hid the copies in a cloth bag, where onions are usually stored. Matteo helped, but silently. He took the blame not with words, but with the weight of his shoulders. In the evening, Jan left, taking the bag with him. It was clear that he did not do it for profit. He saw such a service as part of the merchant's craft. Where there is a road, there is responsibility. That same night, the rope on the bell tower began to move. Domenico noticed two people at the attic door of the temple. They were trying to lift the heavy lid that led to the choir loft. One of them left a wax mark with the same star symbol on the crack. Domenico did not make a sound. He went downstairs, found Lucia, and silently pointed to the mark. In the morning, the cleric Araldo appeared at the herbalist's gate. He said that he had checked the notebook and found dangerous errors in it, that the person who wrote it was leading people into sin. He said that for safety's sake, he would take away some other notes that might have remained with the herbalist, and that the bishop's authority would not tolerate disorder. He spoke calmly, but the knob of his staff pressed the ground at the threshold too confidently. This time Lucia heard not words, but a sequence of actions: seize, pack, shut up. She did not argue. She repeated that he had the notebook and that she had nothing else. But on the same day, she went to the mill. To an outsider, it looked like a normal purchase. In fact, it was an attempt to understand why the name of the family that owned the mill and the forest often appeared in the parish book of donations. The mill staircase smelled of flour. The owner, a widow named Fiorenza, remained calm. People were used to thinking of her as someone who latched on to other people's grief. She was always there when candles were lit in homes. In reality, she was a woman who had learned to survive, to hold her children close, to pay part of the grain to the people above, and at the same time to watch who was standing at the gate at night. She told Lucia that she had seen more than once how a servant from the castle brought small bundles to the church and left the same way the night prayer group came. She added that once she was asked to give the key to the mill storeroom for a secret meeting, supposedly to protect the girls before their wedding. She refused. After that evening, she began to check the measures. Fiorenza's words did not convey resentment, but rather a long-standing habit of dealing with injustice. Lucia understood enough to stop waiting. A few weeks later, Jan returned with a letter. He said that in Milan they had listened to him, believed the paper and the short-sighted man who carried it, and decided to send a secret commission. He said that people resembling pilgrims would come to them, and that one of them knew the sign, 2 fingers on the chest and a glance to the left, as if counting the layers on the wall. He warned that this was necessary for safety, and that it was better to remain silent for now. From this point on, the tone of the story became more intense. A wedding took place in the village. As at other weddings, the bride and groom were equally excited and afraid. Lucia was told to prepare a calming remedy. She refused and told Matteo that she would not give something she did not believe in herself. The old man sighed and confessed to her what he had been keeping to himself for months. Those sheets of paper with recipes really did come from the monastery. They were brought by a novice with thin hands who said that this was how girls were protected from temptation, that it had been tried and tested and blessed. Matteo felt that this was not true, but thought that his word would change nothing, and so he remained silent until he saw Lucia's threat. Now he asked for forgiveness and admitted that his silence was also an act. This was an important turning point. The old man ceased to be a screen. He became a source of confessions. That same week, 3 strangers approached the settlement. They took off their shoes on the shore, as those who have walked a long way do. One was tall, with a tired face. Another was a middle-aged woman in a gray dress. And the third was short, with a keen gaze. They behaved as if they were looking for a place to stay for the night. But in conversation with Matteo and Lucia, they mentioned the sign that Jan had given them. It was the commission. The woman's name was Sister Bianca. She was not one of those strict nuns who look down on people. She looked straight ahead, like a midwife assessing where the pain lies. She asked to see the copies that had been preserved and asked them not to take any unnecessary steps. During the conversation, the name of Lucia's mother came up. It turned out that many years ago, Sister Bianca had been a traveling midwife and had known this woman and helped her. She recognized her daughter's handwriting by the neat lines and numbers. It was not a loud, but important connection. A stranger nun turned out to be connected to Lucia's family by a long-standing bond. The hidden kinship manifested itself not through blood, but through care that spans years and requires no titles. The commission decided not to make a fuss. They knew that if they knocked on the door, it would be closed from the inside. They chose the day when the cleric Araldo was to receive donations and count the income of the parish shop. They came to the church dressed as pilgrims, and Bianca asked Lucia to stand at the door and remember those who entered. Domenico went to the bell tower and sat down by the rope. Fiorenza, the miller's wife, asked to enter the temple and stood next to the alms box. Thus, ordinary people took the places where important people usually stand. It was a quiet rearrangement of figures. The cleric did not immediately realize what had changed. He sat down at the table, took out the scrolls, and began to count. At that moment, footsteps were heard, and a servant from the castle entered the vestibule with his usual leather bag. He placed the bag on the table and said that it was from the gracious Lord to strengthen the parish. The servant did not notice how Bianca lightly turned up her sleeve and showed the commissioner, a short man with a keen gaze, the very same poppy mark on the cleric's ring and the wax seals on the bags. The commissioner stepped back against the wall and took out a sealed letter, without showing it yet. When Geraldo began to record the donation, Bianca asked him to show her the account books. She did not ask her boss directly. She said that the pilgrims were grateful for the shelter and wanted to make a donation, but that such a record required a steady hand, and asked if she could see how they recorded things here. Geraldo smiled and opened the book. At that moment, Lucia, as if by chance, brought the most recent copy, which contained a list of marriages and notes about reconciliation. The commissioner placed 3 scrolls side by side, the original, Lucia's copy, and a small excerpt brought from Milan, where discrepancies had already been noted. Several dates coincided too precisely to be a coincidence. A visit at night, a donation, an entry in the book stating that the young wife had found peace. This was not the knowledge of one person. It was a pattern. Geraldo understood what was happening when he saw the letter with the seal of the bishop's office. He tried to turn everything back. He said that peace is based on trust, that the weak often exaggerate, and that healing is done in silence. He added that simple signs, such as stars on barrels, are used for record-keeping. Bianca did not argue. She asked to open the shop, where oils and herbs are kept. Matteo took out bundles and jars. 3 of them had the same markings as the barrel and tiny strips of paper, with prescribed doses that matched the lines in the notebook. Bianca said she had seen similar sheets in a monastery further south. They were distributed not for treatment, but to give power to those who already had it. She recounted that at that time women were afraid to speak, and then a man from outside came and blamed everything on the herbalist. She said this calmly, like a doctor making a diagnosis. At that moment, people from the castle appeared at the door. The clan manager, who was listed in the books alongside many donations, entered. A short, narrow saber hung from his belt. He said he had heard about the audit and offered his help. Keys, boxes, any information. He glanced around quickly and realized that no help was needed. He cast aside propriety and said that it was slander, that a simple girl had stirred up trouble against the church, that they would find forbidden items in the herbalist's warehouse. He hinted that a man from the city would soon arrive, and that it would be better if the guests left. Then Fiorenza went to the box, opened the lid with her palm, and placed a small wooden tag on the table, which many had seen before. It was a sign that grain was given to widows in the settlement. The tag had a clear notch, identical to the one on the bags with donations. Fiorenza said that such tags were made in the mill shop by order of the castle, that they were the same for alms and for consolation. She said she did not believe in chance. Her voice was even, like that of a woman tired of other people's games. Domenico, without waiting for the command, pulled the rope. The bell rang once. The people in the square turned around. Someone entered, saw the letter with the seal, and retreated in silence. The commissioner raised his hand to prevent a commotion. He read aloud, but not loudly, the contents of the letter. The bishop's office ordered a secret investigation of the complaints, protection of the witnesses, removal of the clergyman from service until the matter was clarified, and sealing of the shop. He added that all those involved in the abuse would be summoned to a hearing in the city. He said that the women were not to blame for being treated for something that was not an illness. The administrator tried again. He noted that rebellion against the clergyman was rebellion against the order that fed the village. He looked around at the people, searching for those who usually nodded. But Fiorenza stood confidently by the box. Domenico held the rope. Matteo did not hide his hands. Bianca looked straight ahead, and Lucia, a simple student, held her copies like an oar that keeps a boat from drifting away. Here, a twist worked, where hidden talent against status broke the usual order. Neat handwriting and patience proved stronger than a ring and a sword. The commission led Araldo out of the church without insults. They simply removed his official braid, sealed the chest, and ordered him to remain under surveillance in the monastery house. They did not allow the crowd to see a false victory. They left room for the law. On the same day, they sent a messenger with the news to the city. The governor left for the castle. On the road, his men were seen arguing about who should go for reinforcements. But by evening, 2 horsemen with seals arrived at the church square. They entered quietly, as Jan had done, and that was enough. Matteo later admitted his involvement to the commission. He said that he had given the potions without checking the source, and had not stopped the stranger's hand when he should have. He was not imprisoned. He was ordered to repent and to teach young herbalists only those recipes where each herb was named honestly. His words were needed because without them it was impossible to understand how everything worked. His condemnation became part of the community's healing process. A few days later, women came to the monastery. Bianca received them one by one. She did not ask unnecessary questions. She helped those who needed it with tears, bread, and a letter for a new job in the city. She remembered names and dates, and because of this memory, the old words of Lucina's mother came to life. In such moments, the invisible thread that stretched across the years became strong. It was that very hidden kinship that did not need to be recorded in a register. It can be seen in the way one woman recognizes in another eyes that refuse to be broken. The castle was not destroyed. The family that owned the mill and the forest did not disappear. They were treated according to the rules of the time. They were obliged to pay for new livestock for poor households. Their servants were taken under supervision, and money was allocated to create a modest workshop for women at the monastery. It was not a victory in song, but a strict denouement that could be endured. In the village, this was considered fair, not to destroy the house from top to bottom, but to remove the supports that held up the shadow. Lucia was given a letter called a guarantee. It said that her words had been accepted, that she was protected from persecution, that if necessary, she would be given passage and a new shelter. She was asked to help Bianca while the commission remained in the district. She agreed. She did not rejoice loudly. She just continued to count, dry, and write. Her handwriting was now a weapon that did not scratch the skin, but changed the outcome. The story did not end there, but went on into everyday life. The commission went to the neighboring parish and town, but a trace of its visit remained in the village. People began to bring their questions to the herbalist, not in whispers, but in a normal voice. Now, no one asked for calm before the wedding. People began to speak simply. They asked for a remedy for fear. They asked for sound sleep. They asked for help where help was needed. This was the first sign that the atmosphere in the houses had changed. Sister Bianca returned a month later. She brought news. The cleric Araldo had been removed, sent to another house for long prayer, and replaced by a strict but poor man. There was another piece of news. A whole bundle of similar leaflets with marks in the margins and the same symbols had been found in the city sacristy. The scribe who had written them had disappeared, but that was someone else's business. At that time, another line of action was taking place in our settlement, invisible at first. One day, a notary arrived with a letter that mentioned the name of Lucina's mother. The notary's name was Pietro. He was strong, taciturn, and looked intently at people and walls. He said that many years ago his sister, who worked as a maid in one house, wanted to baptize her daughter in another parish because she was afraid of gossip. He had quarreled with her at the time because of foolish pride. Then he left. When he returned, his sister was gone. He found a monastery record of the baptism and saw Bianca's name on the list of witnesses. He said that he had been looking for this daughter for many years and had not found her because 2 names had been written down and 1 had been crossed out. Now he had a letter in his hands where everything came together. The mother's name, the daughter's name, the year, which matched Lucia's copies. Pietro did not enter Lucia's house with words about the discovery. He asked Matteo to show him the old things. In a box under some herbs, they found a hook with a pattern that had once been given to a young woman for her work in the house. The hook had a carved mark, the same star, only without hooks on the sides. It was the mark of a craftsman, not a secret circle. Pietro recognized the workmanship. He had made this hook as a young man, while still a student, and given it to his sister as a dowry gift. It was a moment when the boomerang of a long-ago deed returned and hit its mark. A hidden kinship came to light. Pietro stood up awkwardly and said he was her uncle. These words did not sound like a celebration. They sounded like thick bread on the table. Simple, necessary, late. The settlement did not find out about this right away. Lucia and Pietro did not ask people for recognition or size. They began to work together. He with papers, she with herbs. He did not control her. He learned patience and silence from her. Her neat scrolls helped him in one matter. the notary gathered from copies and testimonies a line that was missing in the city. It included not only the guilt of the clergy, but also the participation of the castle servants. The notary managed to get several people punished not with whips, but with labor. They were sent to repair bridges and roads. It seemed like a trifle, but in specific places, life became easier. Carts stopped getting stuck in the mud, and suddenly widows had time for other things besides carrying buckets. Meanwhile, Domenico grew, not in stature, but in respect. The one whom people were accustomed to ignoring became a symbol of simple honesty. He did not receive laurels, did not become a scribe. He remained at the bell. But when someone tried to pull off another appeasement, he heard the movement at the door in advance and came down the stairs in time. His role was quiet but decisive. Thus, the underappreciated hero achieved his quiet but genuine triumph. One day, a carriage arrived at the settlement. This was a rare occurrence. A woman in a dark cloak got out. Her face was hidden by a veil. A 10-year-old boy stood next to her. She said through an intermediary that she wanted to talk to Bianca and Matteo. She was brought to the herbalist's house. She removed her veil. She was the daughter of the very family that owned the forest. She limped, quietly held the boy by the shoulder, and said she needed help. She did not make excuses or ask for forgiveness. She asked to hide the child from the vengeance of others, because her husband had died, and her relatives had begun to divide the land and souls. As it happened, this woman became an unexpected benefactor. She brought papers allowing her to open a small workshop in the settlement, where women could learn to spin and sew. She said it was not a favor, but a duty. Then she left, leaving a letter confirming her guardianship of the workshop and allocating part of the income from the forest for its maintenance. This was a step that solved several problems at once. After some time, the commission noted that the number of night visits to the parish had decreased, not because they were banned, but because they became unnecessary. Instead of secret rituals, visible help appeared. In this new life, Lucia did not hide behind other people's decisions. She began to visit those who were afraid to go to church in the evenings. She explained herbs without any secret meaning, spoke about pain in simple words, and reminded people that the blame lies with those who abuse power, not with those who have endured violence. She did this without preaching, without grand gestures. Her work was like repeating steps along a familiar path, back and forth, from house to house, with a glass jar and a paper scroll. A year later, a new cleric appeared in the village. His name was Francesco. He was poor because he was born into a landless family. He did not wear a ring. He knew how to read and how to listen. He came to Matteo's shop without offense and said through a retelling that he wanted to understand how people here get sick and recover. He asked Lucia to show him the copies, not for the authorities, but for his own conscience. She showed him only what could not harm those who had trusted her. He understood the boundary and did not impose himself. With such a priest, the village settled down. Strange phrases disappeared from the parish book. Words appeared that did not frighten. Help for a widow, support for a student, restoration of a bridge. The notebook itself sometimes reminded them of the past. It still lay sealed in the town clerk's office. Sometimes it was brought out to show students how neat lines could be used as a weapon against the truth. It was not burned. It was kept as a reproach and a warning. On the days when it was opened, the same stars were visible in the margins. People no longer saw them as a sign of authority. They saw them as ordinary marks made by clumsy hands, and that made them feel better. Rumors of healing rituals faded away, but the memory of them did not disappear completely. It remained with those who burned their fingers on candles at night, who heard footsteps at their door, and who remained silent while the terrible season passed. These people now knew that silence was also an action. And so, when hunters for other people's weaknesses reappeared in the settlement, they were met not only by the commissars, but also by neighbors who remembered. The shadow grew shorter. All this looked not like a miracle, but like work, where each link is held by another link. Jan, the road, and the courage to tell the truth in a strange city. Bianca, attention and memory. Domenico, quiet strength. Fiorenza, straightforwardness at the right moment. Matteo is the recognition of his share in the trouble. Pietro is the debt that caught up with him years later. Lucia is patience and clarity. Everyone did their part, and together they achieved what people in villages call life became easier. And when someone later asked where justice was, people answered without grand words. They said that justice is when evil calls itself out loud and loses its power because it no longer hides behind other people's names. They said that order is not where there is fear, but where you can call pain by its name. And they added that in that year, in the middle of the 14th century, the northern winds became quieter, not because of spells, but because people in the square stopped whispering and began to speak in normal voices. That last autumn, when the leaves in the forest were turning rusty, the wheels rustled in the monastery workshop. The girls were learning to pull threads. Their fingers had small cuts, like those who are learning a new craft. On the wall hung a sign that read simply, "For those who need bread and silence." Lucia came there, brought herbs for headaches, and left a list of simple hand exercises on the table. Sometimes she sat by the window and looked at the bell tower. At that time, a fresh rope hung there, touched by Domenico's hand. He now sometimes allowed children to ring the bell under his supervision. Visitors to the city smiled when they heard the uneven chimes. They did not know that each one held the memory of that night when an underappreciated man pulled the rope at the right moment and prevented a foreign power from closing the door from the inside. The end of this story is not noisy. It is like candles quietly going out after a holiday, one after another, without fuss. The main thing remains. People have learned to distinguish between help and coercion. They have seen that simple deeds have a power that false authority fears. They became convinced that a letter can be both a trap and a key, and that everything is decided by the hands that hold these letters. And if you think that all the changes happened by themselves, that is not true. They were made by those who did not wait for miracles, but did their job, steadily, calmly, in plain sight.